Hi friends! Welcome to a very special social emotional learning time. I'm Miss Mindy, a school counselor, and I'm calling this Couch Conversations because I want this to be a time when we just sit regarding tough subjects. I've designed this time to be less about learning and more about talking and listening. I'm hoping that this can be a time of sharing and growing together, and I've designed it specifically for just girls and specifically for just guys. I also intend on it to be a time when you have a same gender adult that facilitates your conversation there in the room with you as I'm sharing and dialoguing from my end. This is a necessity, and it's important in leading your discussion, even though I'll be here answering some of the questions. Now, before we begin, it's important that we ensure that these couch conversations be a place for all of us to participate. It's important that you make a commitment to each other right there in the room where you are, that whatever is shared in our couch conversations is kept strictly confidential. This is not something that you'll talk about outside the group. We want this to be a circle of trust where everyone's journey is protected and respected. This means that the things that are shared in your group don't leave that group or are not talked about outside of couch conversations. This will also ensure that these couch conversations are made on the couch and they stay on the couch. So in today's couch conversations, I'll be sharing a couple of personal stories about times I didn't stand up for myself. You see, I've always been a great stander-upper for others. I stood up for the underdog, for the bullied kid, for the handicapped friend. I stood up for them all, but I never understood the importance of standing up for myself, especially when it came to physical touch. I was never good at advocating for my personal boundaries and protecting my body by consent to physical touch. And this is ironic too, because I was very clear on my personal touch boundaries. In our couch conversation, you will get a chance to share what personal touch boundaries you have set for yourself. First though, let's ask this question. Why is it important to set personal touch boundaries? Go ahead and write your response on your Sally or Study Guide and then share as a group. I will give your group leader a chance to pause, and then we'll come back together when your group has completed the conversation. So I'm guessing that in your personal responses, you said things like your personal touch boundaries are important because they set basic guidelines of how you want to be treated. You're essentially establishing how others are able to behave around you. In a way, you're saying that personal touch boundaries are an investment in yourself because you're worth it. Worthy. Let's unpack that for a second because the Bible talks about it specifically for females. Here's what it says, and it's in Proverbs 31:10. And it defines worthiness, and it says, "Who can find a woman of worth? Far beyond jewels are their value." So when I think about jewels, when I think about worthy jewels, my mind goes straight to diamond ring. I had never owned a single piece of jewelry in my whole life, and when my husband proposed, I now had a ring valued at $2,500. It was beautiful with this large diamond set in between two smaller ones, and the silver was not that cheap silver plating, it was platinum. The thing was that I didn't know anything about taking care of jewelry, ladies. I didn't know anything about how to clean my jewels, how to polish my jewels, how to store my jewels. I didn't know any of it. And at times, that gorgeous, valuable ring was tarnished and the diamond was cloudy. In fact, I didn't even have my kind of ring holder that would keep my precious jewels safe. So it should have come as no surprise then in year 7 of marriage, I lost my precious jewels completely. Gone and never to be recovered. And now, in my 17th year of marriage, I can thank my lucky stars for a man who isn't angry about that, but I can also acknowledge the lack of knowledge I had around caring for my jewels that led to my overall loss of that precious ring. So there on your Salyer study guide, use that background and that context and apply it to you. How does Proverbs 31:10 define you as a woman of worth? How important is knowledge of and care of your personal touch boundaries in order to protect your personal touch values? So when it came to the boundaries that I had set for myself when I was in high school, here's what I had committed to the Lord and myself. I was committing to preserving all intimate physical touch until I met the person who I intended to marry. This meant that I was limiting every physical act to not progressing beyond kissing. Secondly, I was committed to sexual abstinence, and for me, this meant not engaging in any kind of sexual act. So no oral sex or intercourse of any kind. That was my personal commitment. I had also been convicted that there were physical acts that were ones that I wanted to preserve, like groping, so I wanted to be intentional to not engage in those acts. I didn't want to mess around with technicality of virginity. I rather wanted it to be very clear what physical touch I was willing and was not willing to engage in. So, there in your couch conversation group, use your Salyer study guide to write what, if any, physical touch boundaries you have identified for yourself. You can be as broad or as specific as you want. Write and share whatever you feel comfortable with, and then, for those of you who are willing, please share in your group what you wrote. You can share as much as you want or as little as you want, and those of you who are listening right there, please remember to withhold any judgment. This is a time for growth for all of you, and it has to be a safe place for all. So here's the question, and I'm going to allow some time for your group leader to pause and engage you in conversation, and then to play when you're ready to come back together. Question 3. What are your physical touch boundaries that you've identified for your own body? We'll come back together in a minute. See, here's the thing. Setting physical touch boundaries is super important, right? But they don't do any good unless they're communicated to the person you're in a relationship with that has possibly strong convictions like yours, or maybe they have different convictions. I learned this the hard way, that communication has to happen. So, 2 different situations, but really the same element. As a freshman in high school, I was dating this guy named Chris. Chris was known for pushing the boundaries in general with all girls. And actually with everything, right? With pot, with the law, everything. So I shouldn't have been surprised when I found myself on a trip in the back of a station wagon where he repeatedly groped me despite my intentional replacing of his hand. I thought I had set very strong physical touch convictions, but it didn't matter because I hadn't communicated those to him. 10 years later, same scenario, only this time I was on a trip with a bunch of other people, but got stuck in the back of a van with a guy named Jeff. And Jeff was married. When he made advances on me there in the back seat, I didn't know how to handle it, and I hadn't even known I needed to enforce my physical touch boundaries with this guy. I was put in a very difficult situation that eventually led to the fallout of several friendships and almost the loss of my future fiance and husband-to-be. You see, in both these cases, I learned some important self-advocacy lessons about consent. So there in your couch conversations, discuss what you think I could have done in one or both situations to prevent that situation or protect myself. On your Sell Your Steady guide, reflect on what I could have done better or differently in terms of my personal touch boundaries with location, situation, and preservation. Once you're done writing, share in your couch conversation. So when we're thinking about personal touch boundary location, personal touch boundary situation, personal touch boundary preservation, I want you to set those very strongly for yourself. And the truth is, I really did try to preserve my personal touch boundaries. In both cases, I specifically moved myself and pushed away. That was my attempt at saying no. When I forced their hands away and pressed hard, I was communicating that I was uncomfortable. Those actions were my way of not giving permission or consent for that type of physical touch, and I was doing my part in self-advocacy, but those communications weren't respected or regarded. What we had failed to do in our relationship is establish what consent looked like and sounded like, and what no looked like and sounded like. For me, no looked like the physical removing of his hand and pressing it hard in a place that was more comfortable for me. What are some other forms that consent and no can look and sound like? What do consent look and sound like for you? And what does no look and sound like for you? Go ahead and write them on your Sell Your Steady guide and then share them in your couch conversations. So now that we're coming back together, hopefully you communicated some of what yeses look like and what some of what nos look like, because they come in all different forms. So likely your couch conversation group identified forms of no as being the following. I said yes earlier. It doesn't mean that you're saying yes now. We're dating doesn't mean that you're saying yes now. I didn't say no doesn't mean you're saying yes. I'm not sober, therefore that's not a yes. And I'm not saying anything at all is still not a yes. In fact, the only yes to consenting to physical touch is when you verbally give permission for what's about to happen. I'm crazy about how the Apostle Paul describes consent in Philemon 1:14 because it gives such a beautiful definition about how you should treat others and how you should be treated when it comes to physical touch. Here's what he says, "But I do not want to do anything without asking you first, without getting your consent, so that any good you do for me will be because you want to do it, not because I forced you or it was out of compulsion." I think that's so beautiful. So if you're like me, I had moments when I did not consent, or I consented and then regretted it, right? We can all relate to that. In fact, my back of the van experience with Jeff led to me being accused of starting an extramarital affair, as well as putting his job and my own job at risk. So the consequences for consent are really heavy. Here's what I love. Your physical touch boundaries and choices don't define you. Whether you've lacked consent in the past or had your consent broken, it doesn't define your value or worth. Like my engagement ring, you are precious and you are worthy. And like my lack of care for that ring, maybe you haven't taken the best care of your physical touch boundaries. Maybe you feel tarnished and like your physical touch boundaries have gotten cloudy. Maybe you haven't ever had physical touch boundaries and feel like you've completely lost any consent for your own body. When I lost my ring, my husband could have been angry. He could have scolded me for losing something so precious, something he had given me, and yet he did not. He understood that I hadn't had my tools that I needed to protect my jewels. So he wasn't angry. He wasn't upset. He didn't hold a grudge for losing a precious gift that he had given me. He simply loved me and gave me another ring. It was the most redemptive act he's ever done. I love the story of Rahab in Joshua chapter 2. She is a person that has really represented in the Bible as giving too much consent. Her physical touch boundaries weren't just tarnished and cloudy, they were totally lost. Yet God isn't angry with her. He's not upset with her. He doesn't hold a grudge for losing a precious gift that he had given her. He simply loved her and gave her another chance. It was the most redemptive act he could have done. And here's the key. In God's second chance to Rahab, he allows her to set new terms for herself and gives her another chance to protect her body. He gives her an opportunity to advocate for herself, which ultimately protects her family and protects her future. The same is with you. It doesn't matter if your physical touch boundaries are tarnished or cloudy or lost. Just like Rahab, God doesn't hold a grudge for how you've handled his precious gift. He simply loves you and gives you yet another chance to protect your body. He's affording you a new opportunity to advocate for yourself, to protect yourself, to protect your someday family, and to protect your future. There on your final question of Sal Your Study Guide, I encourage you to set new terms for yourself, just like Rahab, to protect your body. This is a new opportunity to advocate for yourself, to protect yourself, your someday family, and your future. So there on number 5, and I'll give your leader a final chance to pause, I want you to complete my new terms for personal touch, and then we'll come back together. Glad you joined me today for our special edition of Couch Conversations. Until next time, bye-bye.